The Houndmaster is, as of the making of this video, Behavior Interactive's newest killer to release into Dead by Daylight via the Doomed Course chapter, featuring a pirate named Portia May who commands her dog Snug to kill survivors. She launched on November 28, 2024 to a mixed reception, and she was released in a state that many described as weak, buggy, and disappointing. After 2 hotfixes, she was in a much better state stability-wise, with a few bugs here and there. But notably, she received some sweeping balance changes to put her lethality in line with other characters. One of these changes was the time it takes for Snug, the dog, to vault windows and pallets while chasing a survivor. It was previously 0.9 seconds, but they changed it to 0.45 seconds. Or did they really? You see, I hope to prove in this video, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the Houndmaster's new buffed dog vault time is significantly faster than 0.45 seconds. I'll be using formal statistical hypothesis testing to prove my point, and I'll also show some clips along the way to make sure you all see exactly what I'm seeing. Oh, and yeah, that means I'm tricking you into watching what is effectively a math video. Womp womp. So what's the big deal about this, right? Who gives a shit if her vault time is slightly different than what it says? Well, this is specifically an issue right now, because the vault speed is what everyone, and I mean everyone, has been complaining about. Houndmaster has gone from a decently strong, but hard to play character to one of the easiest high tiers ever, and an absolute pub stomper. These buffs were far too much, and most of them should be reverted. Especially the vault speed, and being able to use search speed in chase.
Look at it. Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, I'm holding my power. He can't run. He cannot run. Nothing he can do. He has to give up power control. Which is like, yeah, that's a bit ridiculous. That is certainly ridiculous. Because like, if he drops the pallet...
So wouldn't it be a little wild if we've never even tried consistent 0.45 second vaults at all? Let's dive in. So, to start, how did this issue actually get on my radar? Well, I noticed during some of my clips that I was getting in-game that Snug was just passing through vault points at an exceptional speed. I took some of these clips and I analyzed them frame by frame, and I found consistently that Snug was vaulting significantly faster than the 0.45 seconds that are labeled to be Snug's actual vault time. This led me down a rabbit hole of testing various conditions and situations in-game, but it wasn't quite enough for me. I wanted to be as close as I can get to being 100% sure that Snug's vault time is actually bugged. Whether it's higher than the labeled amount or lower, I didn't give a shit. I wanted to know. So that's why this exists. This next section, and frankly the rest of the video, will include a good amount of math. I'll explain things as I go throughout the process, but this is the only way for me to definitively prove that this is an active bug occurring in the game as we speak. The consequences for a bug like this are ones that can ruin the reputation of a character, especially one that has just launched and opinions are still fresh. If there's any moment during this explanation where you're like, man, this guy fucking sucks, this is boring, just skip it. I'll make sure to have the rest of this video fully organized into sections, so if there's a spot you aren't particularly vibing with, you can just move to the next section and get to the point. So let's get into the math. First, we need to get a whole bunch of samples of Snug's vault time to be able to compare them to the values behavior has said Snug vaults at. When getting our sample, it's imperative we're organized about it, because we want to make sure that this sample applies across a large variety of situations that could realistically happen in the game. This helps mitigate against data that is skewed towards one specific conclusion. Therefore, I set up categories and different smaller sets of samples to organize myself better. Notably, there are 10 total sample sets, with each sample set containing 15 samples measured in frames it takes Snug to vault. More on the frame stuff later. The 10 sample sets are divided into 2 categories. 5 of these sample sets are dedicated to windows specifically. The other 5 are dedicated to pallets specifically. This allows me to test my hypothesis on each individual type of resource Snug can vault over. This also allows me to detect if one resource in particular is causing a problem, whether it be windows or pallets. Now that we have things organized, let's set up some testing conditions to make sure that across the board these recordings of Snug's vaults are consistent. The recordings and all of the data logged as a result will be at 120 frames per second, and this is consistent. The recordings themselves were done in approximately 1600 by 900. Each sample set also has its own individual set of indicators as to how I can tell when Snug is vaulting or when he is moving. Additionally, I had to set up some terminology that makes sense, to make every category make sense and be consistent. Specifically around what is considered to be quote-unquote hugging a vault, as that's a term I use a lot. For the purposes of this test, quote-unquote hugging a vault as survivor refers to being the same distance away as one would have to be after a running vault on a window or a rushed vault on a pallet. As a killer, hugging a vault refers to the killer's collision box colliding with the vault itself, effectively being as close as you possibly can be to the vault. Look, I could drone on and on about the various conditions associated with these sample sets, but let's be honest, that's kind of fucking boring for everyone involved. So, for the sake of being somewhat communicative, but not totally, as I ramble on with this ridiculously long message for no particular reason, you'll see them scrolling by on the video. Pause and read them whenever you feel like it. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, acquiring these samples came with a lot of issues, mainly bugs. For example, did you know Snug just sometimes ignores windows if he's redirected into the center of a vault while in close proximity to it? This effectively means Snug will phase through the vault, hit the survivor on the other side, with 0 vault time. In fact, this was so fucking consistent that in one of the sample sets, I had to include these values because even after redoing the sample twice, it kept happening. The other notable bug, surprise surprise, also had to do with redirects as well, but with pallets. If the redirect was similar to the vault, centered onto the pallet and in close proximity, occasionally Snug would phase through the pallet and not hit the survivor at all, ignoring everything in his way. I can't fully make the claim that this is reproducible, but I've legitimately had some really good players in my matches actively crouch near pallets to make Snug go through them. This is the sort of thing that needs more testing though, and that's for another discussion. Let's move on to the frame data. Now that all this footage was recorded, it was time to dissect it frame by frame and count. This took forever. There were so many issues counting frames and deciding how I should be figuring out when Snug is vaulting and when he's not, that I'm fairly certain I redid all of the samples 2 times over to make it as clear as possible, and that's not even counting any of the extra redos I did for mistakes. On average though, for each individual sample set, I won't go over exactly what the average frame time to vault was, but I'll show the table on screen and I'll explain how to read it. So effectively, you're going to be looking at the last columns on here, where it says mean in seconds. That is going to be the average value across the 15 samples I took, and that is going to be the average time it took Snug to vault during this sample and this specific situation. You'll have the table on screen. Feel free to look at it if you care. Otherwise, if you're just here for the math without the math, then carry on, I guess. Since we're going to be performing a hypothesis test on total sample of everything, we'll need to collect some data for all of them. Notably, for each of these 3 categories, we need the sample mean, also the average, the sample standard deviation, and the sample size. Luckily, you can skip most of the math here because 99% of spreadsheet software can do this for you if you just plug the shit in. The next thing to consider is what significance we want this test to have. To explain what significance is, it's effectively the likelihood of you accidentally claiming your hypothesis to be true, despite it not being true. The standard for this value in statistics for situations that are low risk is 0.05. But I'm feeling a little fucking frisky, so we're doing 0.01. Now that we have all the values we need, we can move on to formally testing our hypothesis. So I've been going on about all this hypothesis testing stuff, but what the fuck is it anyways? Well, in statistics, it's defined as a way to use data you've gathered to infer whether or not it supports a specific claim or hypothesis. In our case, our hypothesis is that Snug vaults faster than 0.45 seconds on average. In hypothesis testing, there's a null hypothesis and an alternative hypothesis. The null hypothesis is the widely accepted theory. In this case, that Snug vaults in exactly 0.45 seconds. and the alternative is the one you're attempting to infer. So in this case, Snug vaulting faster than 0.45 seconds. For our particular test, we'll be using the frames at 120 frames per second that it took Snug to vault, as that will paint a way more accurate picture, and this also serves to make even simple small differences visible, helping us a little bit in accuracy. For the sake of brevity, I'll only show my process for the full combined recordings. That is, I'll only show the results for both pallet and window vaults combined. No matter what you do, I did both individually, the result of the test is the same. So, first things first is we should lay out what we've got for our values. Our sample size was 150 volts, our sample standard deviation was 20.4170 frames, and our sample average was 36.1 frames. We're going to conduct this test at 0.01 significance, and 0.45 seconds at 120 FPS is 54 frames, meaning what we're doing is we're checking to see if Snug's vault time is faster than 54 frames. Additionally here, we're going to have to define what's called a random variable. Now, it's not random in the way you're probably thinking if you're unfamiliar with statistics or probability, but what makes it random is that we can't know what value it has before some event happens. Think of it this way. We can't possibly know how long Snug will take to vault if we don't see him vault, because that vault that we're measuring didn't happen yet. In traditional statistics, we'd normally give this a letter name and that sort of deal, but for the sake of this video, let's just refer to this random variable as the amount of time it takes Snug to vault a vault point. For this, we'll also be using a specific type of distribution called the t-distribution. If you're unfamiliar with statistics, don't worry about this. It's standard when we lack a certain variable called the population standard deviation, which we do not know here, so therefore we have to use this. Next, we need to figure out what the hell our hypothesis actually is. In our case, the null hypothesis, which is the widely accepted one, is that on average Snug takes exactly 54 frames to complete a vault. Therefore, our alternative hypothesis, the one we want to see if we can prove, is that on average, Snug vaults in less than 54 frames. Now, it's time for us to calculate what's called a test statistic. This effectively represents the difference between our vault time data and what the widely expected amount should be. This one number will be the basis for proving whether or not Snug takes, on average, less than 54 frames to vault. This value comes out to be around negative 10.7376. If you want to see the math, it's on screen. Go nuts. Next, we'll find the value we should expect if the null hypothesis is true, i.e. that Snug takes exactly 54 frames on average to vault. If our test statistic is lower than this, we'll be able to conclude whether or not Snug is vaulting faster on average. This value can be found very simply. I'll skip it, but the math will be on screen. This value comes out to be negative 2.3521. Our test statistic is significantly lower than this, meaning we can confidently conclude that on average, the number of frames Snug takes to vault is less than 54 while measured on 120 frames per second. Okay, so sure, we have the numbers and the proof this is happening, but why is it happening? Isn't that the entire point? There's no reason to do this if there's no way for us to diagnose the issue. Well, you're in luck. I have a theory I think is quite solid that would explain exactly why this is so prevalent. Notice how in my data I specified exactly when a survivor was hugging a vault and when the Houndmaster was hugging a vault? Well, I noticed during all of this whole nerding out shit that consistently Snug has a lower overall vault time when the survivor is close to or hugging the vault. This was consistent on both pallets and windows. This leads me to the conclusion that Snug's hitbox is actually active during the vault, which is a significant deviation from the other vaulting dash killers, like Blonde White Guy and Stupid Fucking Ginger Doll, who have their hitboxes deactivated during the vault. Due to this excess theorized hitbox activity, I think Snug's hitbox collides with the survivor hurtbox well before his vault is meant to be complete, resulting in the vault being cancelled and the grab occurring. But what does this mean for gameplay, I hear you asking? Well, don't fret, this is where it gets interesting. Due to Snug's hitbox activity, pre-dropping is made nearly impossible against the Houndmaster due to the survivor's close proximity with the pallet. However, if you're spaced away from the window or pallet, Snug's full vault time of 0.45 seconds takes effect, giving some room for the survivor to dodge. So, how do you counter this, and the Houndmaster in general? Pretty simple in essence, but requires a little bit of nuance and finesse in-game. Don't pre-drop, don't hug vaults, and try to envision where Snug will end up based on where the Houndmaster is looking while she's charging. This isn't a video dedicated to counterplay necessarily, but if you're looking to figure out how to play around the active hitbox, these are some general tips that might help. So, I hope you enjoyed this little dive into not just the Houndmaster's unfortunate bugs, but also a little bit of statistics and hypothesis testing. I know there might be a few folks who nitpick how I tested it and whatnot, but seriously, this absolutely isn't meant to be anything significant or serious. It's merely meant to diagnose a bug I'm experiencing in the game and put it into a form that makes sense to me and a form that I can share with others. If you managed to make it this far without snoozing off, thanks for that. I've made an official bug report diagnosing this issue, and it will be the pinned comment and also in the description. Happy holidays, happy new year, and until next time, see you in the fog.